Hey guys, I'm Matt from MWA Woodworks, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I made this desktop for my new office renovation. I'll show you how I cut this nice curved profile on the front edge, and I'll show you how I gave my desk wireless charging capability. So I'm making this desktop out of 6/4 walnut, and I begin by breaking this lumber down to rough length at the miter saw. Now I want the final length of this desk to be 5 feet, so I'm going to cut these to about 62 inches for now, and that's going to give me a couple of inches later to trim down to final size. And just as I was about to be done, this happened. That is what kickback looks like on a miter saw, and this one got me good. The blade really got pinched. I had to bring out the old persuader to get this board off of the blade. And it was only when I went back and was editing this video that I realized I really should have unplugged that miter saw. That's not real safe, and no one should do that. Always unplug a power tool before you try and fix something like this. After I removed the board, I finished the cut and moved on. Now, since I purchased rough sawn lumber, I need to mill these boards up. Because a couple of these boards were wider than my joiner, I needed to trim them down to be able to mill them. Over at the joiner, I begin to flatten one face of the boards. But I did want to mention that if you don't have a joiner or a planer, you do have the option of buying pre-surfaced lumber and skipping the milling process entirely. I always mill my own lumber when I can because it's cheaper to buy rough sawn lumber. And after that, I flip them on edge to make one edge square to the newly flat face. Now that I have one flat reference surface, I head next door to the planer to make the opposite face parallel to it. These boards started pretty flat, so this didn't take very long at all. Once the planing is done, I could rip the last edge straight at the table saw. And that's basically it. And these boards are ready for the first glue up. So before I do this first glue up, I want to mark the middle joint so that I don't accidentally glue it together. These white markers from RevMark are fantastic for working with walnut. So much easier to see these marks. And then I just add some glue and spread it evenly across the joints. I only glue one side of the joint, otherwise you really get a big mess and a bunch of squeeze out, and that's just not necessary. And I'm going to do my best here to make sure that these joints line up flush. Now, it's not super critical for me because I will be running these boards back through the planer, but if you are using pre-surfaced lumber and this is going to be the only glue up you do, it is pretty important to make sure that you get these boards lined up and as flat as possible. That's just going to make the rest of this project go easier for you. I then alternate my clamps top and bottom to get good, even clamping pressure. And after about 30 minutes, I went back and I scraped off the excess glue. It's a lot easier to remove now once it's skinned over and has begun to solidify. It's also a good idea to remove the glue so it doesn't interfere with how flat these are going through the planer. After a few hours, I take the two halves out of the clamps and head back to the planer for the second and final flattening. And I'm going to go ahead and give everything a good once over with the scraper here just to get any remaining high spots or glue that's dried off before I send them through the planer. Now, the other trick I like to use here is to mark the top of the boards with a pencil. This is just going to help me see where the planer has cut. Now I'm going to be taking super light passes here in order to remove the absolute minimum amount of material, so that's why it's important to me to know where the planer has been on the surface so that I stop as soon as all of those pencil marks are gone. I make sure the top side is completely flat, the bottom just has to be mostly flat. Any imperfections, low spots or dings, anything like that can be left because it's just never going to be seen once this desktop is installed. And once I get them flat again, it's time to head back to the bench and talk about this last glue up. So there are a couple of options that you have to help yourself with this alignment. One of them is to use a domino. And a domino looks like this. It's just a small hunk of beechwood, pretty thick. This is a 10 millimeter domino by 50 millimeters. So it's a pretty good size, pretty sturdy piece of material that will go in between the boards like this to help with alignment in this direction.
The other option you have, which is a more budget-friendly option, is to use a plate joiner or a biscuit joiner. So they look like these little thin footballs. So you can do the same thing. These two machines operate basically the same way. You plunge in from the side, you plunge into the other side, and then you glue this or this into place. All right, so one more thing I want to mention before we get started. You absolutely do not need either one of these tools to successfully glue this desktop together. We're only using them here to aid in the alignment. They're not providing any additional strength. The glue joint is going to provide all the strength that you need. So if you're careful in gluing this board together and you get it nice and flat and seamless just by being careful, that's going to be plenty strong enough. You're never going to need any additional dominoes or biscuits in here for strength. It's only for alignment purposes. So if you don't have either one of these machines or you can't afford to get one, don't worry. You're still going to have a successful glue up as long as you're very careful in gluing these two boards together.
Now, for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and use the domino for this glue up, and it starts by marking reference lines across the glue joint. This is going to tell me exactly where to cut the mortises for the dominoes. All right, so I'm going to get 1/2 of this out of the way so I can begin cutting. I'm looking for my reference lines here to match up with the center of the domino. I'm going to do a total of 5 dominoes for this glue up. Anything more here I think is just overkill. And I repeat the same process with the other side. This process goes exactly the same way if you're going to use a biscuit joiner. The only difference here is you're making a different shaped hole. All right, to start this glue up, I begin by adding glue to the mortises. I then insert my dominoes and go get the other side. Now on this side, I'm not only going to add glue to the mortises, but I'm also going to add glue to the glue joint itself. I'm careful here to get good even coverage across the length of the joint. I can then just slide the two halves together and begin clamping. One tip I have for you here is you don't need to crank down on this with the clamps. You can already see a line of squeeze out starting to form all along the joint after I apply just a moderate amount of clamping pressure. This is a sign that your joint is good, and applying a ton of clamping force can introduce tensions into the wood, and in extreme cases, you can distort your tabletop. Now right here, you can see what that squeeze out looks like, and I'm going to go ahead and let this dry overnight. All right, it's the next day, and I'm going to go ahead and remove these from the clamps, and I'm going to trim the ends straight with my track saw. A circular saw can get this job done too, but I like the dust control of a track saw. I'm taking it slow here because this is pretty thick material. All right, once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and give everything a good sanding. And you can see here I'm going ahead and marking the surface with a pencil again, which is just going to help me see where I've sanded and when I can move on to the next grit. In all, I sanded with 80 grit, 120 grit, and 150 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to explain later why I stopped at 150. I wiped away the excess dust with a shop towel, and now it's time for something fun. For my desk, I wanted to add a sweeping curve to the front edge. I think this is going to add some visual interest. And seeing as how I'll be looking at this nearly every day, I might as well make it pretty to look at, right? I made this template out of 1/2-inch ply, and I'm just tracing out the curve on the desktop. And for obvious reasons, this is a little too big to cut this curve out on the bandsaw, so I opted for the next best thing, my jigsaw. I followed my line, but I stayed about 1/8 of an inch away from it. Easy peasy. I then attached my template back to the top using double-sided tape, and I just used that line that I drew earlier as a reference for where the template goes. It pays to be careful here because where I place this template is exactly where I'm about to cut. Now to remove the rest of the waste, I'm going to install a flush trim bit in my router table, and I'm lining up this guide bearing with the plywood template. And to cut this flush, I just guided the workpiece into the bit and made the cut. Now, having such a long curved cut, I was pretty worried about getting some tear out here, but miraculously it went pretty smoothly. And I celebrated by watching all these fluffy shavings magically disappear. And here you can see what that finished curve looks like. There are a few mill marks, but I can take care of those with sanding later. Now, I wanted something a little more than just a curve on the front of the desktop, so I installed a chamfer bit in my router table and added an underbevel. And boys and girls, underbevel is the word of the day. Go ahead and try to use that in a sentence. Next, I added a tiny chamfer to the top edge using my trim router. This is no more than a 1/4 inch, just breaking the edge here to make sure that I don't scrape my forearms on the front edge of the desk. Now, with all that done, it is finally time to apply the finish. And for this desktop, I'm going to go ahead and use Rubio Monocoat as the finish here. This is a hard wax oil that is super easy to apply. This is also the reason that I stopped sanding at 150 grit. This finish needs to be able to chemically bond with the wood fibers, and to achieve that, you really shouldn't go past 150 grit. I just apply a little finish and begin to work it into the grain until I get good coverage across the entire surface, and then I let it sit for about 10 minutes. After that, I buffed off all the excess oil with a cotton rag. And by cotton rag, I mean old t-shirt. I want to completely remove all the excess oil until the surface feels dry to the touch. Now keep in mind here, the finish is not actually cured yet. That's going to take about 3 days. I've just removed all the excess oil so it feels dry. Now there's one more feature that I really wanted to add to my desk, and that is a wireless charger. Now the set that I bought from Doug Mockett is really nice because it comes with everything you need in the package to make this installation, including the Forstner bit with a depth stop. I go ahead and use a center punch to mark the location of the center where I want the wireless charger to be. I then used the Forstner bit that was supplied with the stop collar added, and I drilled a hole to the correct depth, leaving about 1/8 of an inch of material at the bottom of the hole. And this thing cuts surprisingly well into that solid hardwood. I then used the world's smallest and most frail drill bit to drill a very small pinhole into the top of the desk. And all you got to do at this point is just add the wireless charger like so. It comes with these little screws that go into expansion slots to keep the charger firmly in place. I plugged in the charger, and you can see the tiny light shining through that pinhole, which lets me know exactly where the charger is. And like magic, my new desk can charge my phone. Now, if you want to check out these wireless chargers for yourself, I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description. I think these things are total game changers. Well, I really love how this desktop turned out. This is going to be amazing in my office, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video of it being built.